Hello and welcome back to the Code Maven podcast. This time we are going to talk about version controls and why you use version controls. Before you get started with using Git or any other kind of version control, before we start learning it, let's talk about a little bit about why you would want to use. My name is Gabor Sabo, as I mentioned, and the slides that I'm basing on these presentations can be found in this link. So let's follow this link to see what's there. Especially we are going to look at this slide of it why I use Git why use version control at all. So the thing is that you probably are writing let's say you write a file, a document, or even a Word document, or you create an Excel file with some data or anything that is just a single file, and then you keep updating it and keep saving it, and at one point you see that it's okay, or you're quite satisfied with this, you want to send it to someone, and then you usually want to put it aside to make sure that you can get back to that specific version that you sent to the person, either to see what was exactly there, or maybe to compare it to a later version that you make changes to this. So what you do is create the same file name with the number 1 at the end, or create a directory and with the number 1 in it, and then put the file in that directory. And as you go on, you create a new file name with number 2, and later on, a couple of days later, number 3, and so on. So most people, as they write documents, they already create some kind of homemade version control system. If you're writing a program in an application, then usually you'll have a lot more files than just a single file. And then the version control, this homemade version control, can be either creating directories and copying all the files of the current state of your application to this directory, and then you will have directories of 1, 2, 3, and so on. Or maybe with dates, you will have the directory names with dates to remind you when that version existed. Or some people would just save the specific file that they have changed, and then they will have these file names with dates on it, and maybe even the seconds in which they were copied over and then saved. And so, as I see, most people use some kind of a version control. They usually they start with some kind of a manual homemade version control system like this. But why would you do something like this if you can have one of the actually one of the standard tools, for example, like Git, to use as a version control? So there are a couple of advantages for using a version control system. One of them is this, and there are very few, and it means that they get quite standardized. So when you start working with someone else, maybe on their project or something, you don't have to learn about how they save their versions, in which directories, or what is their naming conversion of how to save a current state of the files, because they use a standard version control tool. But moreover, more than that, there are a couple of issues and that I mentioned on this slide that I think is extremely important with for programmers and in general, I think people. But having a version control tool provides these services, and one of them is the fearless experimentation, the way I call it. So if you're a chemist, or yeah, let's say if you're a chemist and you put together two substances, you have no way to go back from the previous state. So you made some change, and then that's the world has changed. And if you're a physicist and you cut open a person's stomach, there's no real way to going back. I was saying, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I'm just checking how would that work. Using version control system, a programmer can do any experiment and can safely know that the person that the programmer can go back to the previous state of what they have. Another point here is, and I made this fearless deletion. So in many cases, I see people keep around old code, saying, okay, maybe we'll need it some point, and we know that we're not currently using this code, but maybe someday we'll need to copy paste from it, or maybe we'll actually need to use it. so we don't delete it, and then you just accumulate a lot of basically garbage code that's not used, that not only takes up space and compilation time, but takes up a lot of brain cycles when someone actually reads your code and encounters this function and says, okay, what does this function do? And the person will spend lots of time trying to figure out till they might notice that this function is not in use, or maybe it's in use by something else which is not in use. So it can get complicated. But if you have version control system like Git or some other version control system, then you can just delete this code, commit your change into this version control system, and at any point of time when you need it, you can go back to that version, look at it, copy from it pieces, or just bring back the whole piece of code in case you think that's now you need it. Another thing which is very important is the easier and quite smooth collaboration with other people. So as long as you work alone, you might feel that you don't, well, as long as you don't work alone, you don't need collaboration, of course. But once you do collaborate, having a version control system is extremely important. So let's go back to the example without version control system. You have a file, you make some changes, the other person has the same file, that person makes also some changes. How can you now merge together the two changes? How can you make sure that the changes both of the changes are there? So in many places we have in many companies I went to, they have like a shared disk, and then people take from there, edit the file and save it back. But what if two people do it at the same time? Then the second person who saves actually wins and removes all the changes that the first person did. So that's not a good idea. Having a version control system can make it really smooth to allow people to collaborate. Of course, it has some issues. It's not like everything is perfect. People still need to talk to each other, but in many cases, it makes it much smoother to collaborate with other people, even if they are in different time zones, different locations, and so on. History. So one of the basic things is that you can easily look at your history, what changes were made. If you have multiple people contributing to the source code, then who made the changes? If you are keeping a good track of why did you make the change, so every time when you make a change, you actually have some explanation. Why did you do that? Then it's a gold mine. So actually, I rarely need to look at the history. So in fact, it's all nice what I'm explaining here, but you actually rarely need to look at the history. But when you do, it's extremely important and extremely valuable that you can look at the history. So it's a little bit like backups. Most of the time you really rarely need to have backups, but when you do, if you don't have it, well, that's a real big issue. So this is more or less similar to history, although definitely history, we look at a lot more about at history, just because we make all kind of small mistakes. So for example, one of the cases that we can easily make is that you have some working code and you check it, and then some people make some changes, you make some changes, other people make some changes, and check the parts that you changed, and 2 weeks down the road, someone reports that some feature stopped working, basically. And well, they know that it used to work. You remember it used to work. You see that it doesn't work. So they remember maybe that it worked 2 weeks ago. How can you find out what happened, what change made it? So version control systems, and especially Git, has tools for this. But without having this history, you really can't do anything. Having the history, you will be able to track down what change caused this error, why was that change made. Usually this change is made for some good purpose, but maybe they have some side effects, so we'll have to understand and not just redo the change, because that will break something else. And finally, just to get to the end of the slide, so there are a bunch of version control systems. Some of them are proprietary, so you have to buy them. Many of them are open source. Here there's a list of them: Git, Mercurial, Subversion, CVS, RCS. That's just going back in history. The most popular these days is Git. Most popular by far. It's a distributed version control system. It was created by Linus Torvalds, the same person who created the Linux operating system, the Linux kernel actually. It's used by almost everyone, both open source and corporate. So that's what we are going to learn later on in this course. For now, thank you for watching this, and if you have questions, just do ask.